Hello, Soundies. Welcome to our Sound for Video session. Today is the 31st of July, 2022. It's a warm one here. It sounds like it is for a bunch of you as well. Thanks so much for joining us. Let's go ahead and head on over to our agenda and we'll see what we've got going for today. Signal chain review. We have the pretty standard. We're back to our standard for the last several weeks here. Earthworks ethos here. Shelford channel is our preamplifier, our compressor, and EQ. And then that sends a line level signal out to our Canon C200 as our main camera here. That combines the sound and the video, sends it via HDMI to the ATEM Mini Extreme ISO. That sends an HDMI output to a decimator, which is a cross converter. That converts it from HDMI to SDI, sends it out the door there to the other room where we have an Epiphan Pearl Nano that's encoding it and sending it over to YouTube. We also have a little mic set up here for Danny. Hi, Danny.
Hi, Curtis. How's it going?
Good. You sound echoey when I leave my mic.
Is that better?
Better. Okay. All right. Danny is coming in to a Shure KSM8 is her microphone. That's coming into a Sound Devices Mix Pre, which is right here on the desk in front of me, and then that's going with a 3.5 millimeter line output into the ATEM Mini Extreme ISO as well. So that's our signal chain for those that are curious about those kind of things. I want to tell you a little bit about something I enjoyed this week, and this was there's a podcast. Many of you are probably familiar with it. It's called 20,000 Hertz. And let's go ahead and switch on over to that. 20,000 Hertz focuses on sound in general terms, and a lot of great episodes. Love most of them. I listened to this one this week called Relearning Bolero, and it's a fascinating listen. This one talks, they cover a couple things, and I think there are a couple of themes that are really interesting here. Number one is that there is a massive, massive connection between our ears that actually pick up sound and how our brains interpret and filter and process the sound. So really, really interesting episode on that. Just kind of highlighting how we all hear a little bit differently, and definitely worth a listen if you're interested. I put a link for it down below if you are interested. Okay. Let's switch on back over. And next, we're going to talk a little bit about in-ear monitors. I have an interesting history with in-ear monitors. I don't particularly care for them, to be entirely honest. And I've bought off-the-shelf in-ear monitors. I've bought Shure. They're really kind of inexpensive set. I think it was the 215s that were about, I think they were $80 or $100. And I say inexpensive, that when you're talking about monitors, in-ear monitors, they can get pricey quite quickly. I also have a set of West Tones. These were over $500, 5-driver model, again, a universal fit model. The problem that I've always had with in-ear monitors is a couple of things. Number one, not very comfortable. And the secret with in-ear monitors is to get a full frequency response, to get especially the low frequencies, you have to have a good seal of your ear canal for that to work with in-ear monitors. And I just have never found them comfortable, and just never really saw the value of them from the standpoint that they were so uncomfortable. And you can wear headphones. So the question is, well, why? Why bother? And so we're going to talk a little bit about that today, and then we'll come back. We didn't have any questions that were submitted ahead of time, but we'll go to the chat after we're done talking about the monitors here. And that's how we'll run things today. So with that, let me just jump in. First of all, Myna is the name of the company. We're going to be taking a look at specifically their custom in-ear monitors that were made specifically for me in this particular case. I'm going to talk about them, but they did pay for these, so I didn't pay any money for these. So that's a $550 set of monitors, just to be really clear up front. And this is, again, I was just mainly curious, what is a custom in-ear monitor? How is it different from an off-the-shelf universal fit type of in-ear monitor? And they're doing something very specific with these that I think is interesting that we'll cover here in just a second. Oops. Okay. I guess Keynote decided to take a little break. So with that, we'll pop back into this over here. Okay. So the thing that's interesting too is that so when you say reference monitors, whether you're talking about near field monitors, speakers, headphones, regular over-ear headphones or in-ears, when you're talking about reference, the idea with reference monitors is that you're going to use them for critical listening. You're going to use them to in a situation where you need to be able to hear any potential problems with the sound and be able to diagnose and fix those problems. That's from my point of view, a very practical definition of what a reference monitor is. Obviously, in-ear monitors are the type that you actually put in your ear canals as opposed to what we are typically called circumaural or over-ear headphones. And so that's, to me, I was kind of like, really, reference monitors? Usually I struggle to get any bass response out of them. So I was a little skeptical when the folks at Myna came to me and said, hey, do you want to try these out? So let's talk a little bit about the pros and cons for using in-ear monitors, especially when it comes to critical listening. So there are some pros, and this was something that was not as clear to me, again, because of the comfort issues that I've had with all the others that I've used, and because I couldn't get them to fit comfortably and actually seal the ear canal. I wasn't getting the bass response I wanted. So I would only typically use them when I was doing a live stream with other participants, just so I didn't have the big headphones on, and I would just suffer through the poor quality, kind of mid-rangey, high-frequency sound and without any bass and just tough it out. So that's been kind of my experience. But there are some pros here, and in this case, we're talking specifically about those that are properly fitted. So that's either going to be custom in-ear monitors or even universal fit monitors that you are able to find a good fit where it seals that ear canal. So the first thing it offers is natural isolation. So you are hearing, and that's one of the big challenges with regular over-ear headphones, is that you don't necessarily get a lot of isolation. So when you hear something and you're in close proximity to the sound source, you're hearing it naturally in the natural world coming through your headphones into your ears, plus you're hearing it amplified again in your headphones. And so that can be a little bit disorienting sometimes, especially when you're really close to the sound source. So that's one thing. Wind resistance is another thing. So just like with microphones, using microphones in the wind, obviously if wind blows across the microphone capsule, you get that distortion. You can get plenty of distortion too with over ears, I found, if you're in, significant enough wind. And so that's another advantage that well-sealed or custom fit in-ear monitors will provide for you, is if you're in a speeding car mixing audio for some reason, which I suppose can happen, that could be a case where an in-ear monitor may actually be advantageous. Also, hearing protection. If you, again, because of that natural isolation, it does offer some additional hearing protection. So if you are recording really, really loud sound sources, gunfire or air shows or really loud performance vehicles, whatever the case may be, that's where in-ear monitors can provide you some protection. And the nice thing is again, because they seal your ear canals, you don't have to run volumes that are nearly as hot. In fact, that's one of the other pros here I'm going to list in just a second, but you can use much more reasonable volume and be able to hear all of the frequencies that you need to hear to do that critical listening. Also, this is an interesting one, and I was a bit of a skeptic on this, but there is potentially less coloration. And the thing that's interesting, again, referencing that 20,000 hertz episode that I talked about earlier, all of us have ears that are significantly different. This I learned also, by the way. We call these ears in the vernacular, but in I guess in scientific terms, it's pinna or pinna. So the fleshy kind of cartilaginous outer portion of our ears is actually called the pinna, and these are all shaped differently. Our ear canals are shaped differently, and then of course, each of us have various states of health and just differences in our eardrums and everything beyond that, as that's part of the hearing system. So there are differences there, but the biggest difference is, of course, that we can control when you're talking about in-ear monitors is you essentially bypass this outer portion and the ear canals, and you put the sound directly in the ear canals up to the eardrums so that there's less coloration by these outer portions of the ear. So that's an interesting thing. And then, as I said before, again, you don't have to drive the volume as loud. I found on even here, and again, it has to do with the impedance, of course, of the headphones themselves, but even with low impedance headphones compared to the Myna in-ear monitors, I don't have to drive the volumes nearly as loud to get that clarity and understand what's happening in terms of the entire audio spectrum. So that's actually an advantage. Now, of course, there are some cons. Number one, if you're going to get custom fit in-ear monitors, they are expensive. $550 as a starting price on a set of custom in-ear monitors, which does not include the trip that you need to make to your audiologist to get the impressions of your ears. So they're pretty pricey. And then I would say there are definitely some cons on the universal fit models. And again, these are basically off-the-shelf in-ear monitors. For me, I've especially found, and I think other people have found this too, they can be really, really difficult to get the right fit. Oftentimes, and I think I might have them here, maybe not, but with the West-Tones, it came with a whole series of different foam, the little foam mushroom tips that come with in-ear monitors typically to kind of customize the fit. Again, despite all my best efforts to find the right fit, I just never really found something that worked, and they were really uncomfortable. So I couldn't wear them for long periods of time. A 1-hour live stream was about all I could handle with those. And I guess one of the cons too, potentially, depending on what you're doing, is that they can be too isolating. So while we listed that as a pro previously, depending on what you're doing, you may not want quite that much isolation. In fact, one of the warnings they give you when you're working with in-ear monitors is be careful, because you're not going to hear some sounds that are around you. So that actually can be a safety issue in some cases. And I can think, for example, my friend Alan Williams, who's a boom operator, he likes to when he's on set, he likes to have a little bit less isolation so he can figure out where the sound is coming from so he can position his boom mic appropriately. So there are some things you have to keep in mind. The Mynas were designed specifically for production sound mixers. But in some cases, so if you're doing booming, maybe it'll work for you, maybe it wouldn't. In some cases, I find that people will wear one of them and not the other. So you have different options. But again, if you need something that's not quite so isolating, that's where in-ear monitors may not be your best option. All right, so first up, what is a Myna? Well, a Myna is actually a bird, and the common hill Myna in particular is a very interesting bird because it mimics the sounds that it hears, and it's capable of what we think of as human speech. They live in mostly southeastern Asia, as I understand it, and they can mimic human voice, among other things. And there's actually, I did some reading. They're actually pretty fascinating birds for other reasons as well, like colonies of Mynas in one place tend to mimic certain things, and then even just a couple of kilometers away, another colony will mimic completely different things. So it's very interesting behavior as well. All right, so the question is, what's special about Myna in-ear monitors? There are a ton of different companies out there that make in-ear monitors. Most of them are focused on the live performance world, so musicians on stage having the need to be able to monitor themselves. So that gives them a little more freedom. They can move around stage. They don't have to stand right in front of their wedge monitor on stage. And they can also, oftentimes they will actually send a custom mix to each of their in-ear monitors. So they'll be wireless so they can move around, have a little bit more freedom. That's pretty standard on bigger shows these days. So what's different about the Mynas is that they are made specifically as reference monitors for production sound. That's their purpose. And that's probably the biggest thing from my point of view, is that they're specifically doing that. But also what's interesting about them is that with the name Myna, they are designing them and voicing them to match basically with other headphones that you're used to using, or that are very common in the production sound world. So, for example, the Sony MDR7506 is something that's very, very common in the production sound world. Not necessarily saying they're the best, or they're the ultimate, or they're perfectly flat, or anything like that, because they're not, but they are very common. And being able to switch between your in-ear monitors that, and your, sorry, I'm going to switch back there, and your, your headphones gives you some options. So you don't have to kind of like reset your entire brain. And that's one of the things too I've learned about headphones, speakers, near field monitors, and now in-ear monitors. The most important thing really is that that they have a decent frequency response. They can represent most of the frequencies, but more importantly than that is actually learning them, actually getting your brain used to them and being familiar with them so that you can make those critical listening judgments. That's the important thing. And that's why I think this is an interesting concept, that they're taking these in-ear monitors and voicing them so that they sound like other specific headphones. And I use the MDR7506s sometimes when, for example, when I am doing recording, but I actually prefer the Beyerdynamic DT770s. And as it turns out, they are also working on developing a set of the IEMs in-ear monitors that mimic the DT770 Pro as well. They're custom molded, so I had an interesting experience with this. I got an appointment with my audiologist, and first of all, not a bad idea to go to your audiologist every once in a while anyway, to get the impressions made for my ears so they can make the custom mold. But that experience was good from the standpoint that they pulled some wax out of my ear. Sorry. But it is for hearing health, it's a good idea to have your ears checked periodically. But then what they do is, I think this audiologist had never done molds for custom in-ear monitors before, and evidently didn't get the full set of instructions, and so made the molds. And what they do is they put a piece of cotton in your ear canal up towards your eardrum, and just to protect your eardrum, and then they inject silicone into your ear to make that impression. And they let it cure for just a few minutes, and they pull it out, and then they send it off to, in this case, Myna. Well, because my audiologist didn't follow all of the instructions, we had to do a second time. And that's because my audiologist didn't pay attention to the specifics that Myna asked them to do. The impressions didn't go far enough into the ear canal, and so they actually asked them to do it again, and they did. It was not a problem. But another thing that they didn't do is that it's important that you also use a bite block. So they actually give you a thing to put in your mouth to bite down on, to hold your jaw in the right position, so that when they make those impressions, they get a good impression that will fit appropriately. So that's another important factor that they ask you to do as well. So once we got those sent off to Myna, it took them not very long, surprisingly, but they took those impressions and were able to make the custom molded in-ear monitors for me. So as I mentioned before, they're voiced to mimic other headphones commonly used in production sound. And they actually gave me a choice. They said, do you want those that sound like the Sony MDR 7506, or do you want the new ones that we're working on that haven't been released yet, that sound like the Beyerdynamic DT770 Pros? And I said, I'm much more familiar with the Beyerdynamics, so let's go with those. And that's what they did. That's what they sent over. So this company was actually started by Glenn True, who is the founder of True Audio, which is a pro sound house here in the United States. They have several different locations, one in Nashville, one in Atlanta, one in Los Angeles, and I think they have some others as well. But they spent about the last 18 months, and he's put together a team of engineers. Drew is one that's worked on the team, or actually he joined the team recently, but I believe he's worked on in-ear monitor design for a couple of decades. And in this particular case, the in-ear monitors that they developed here actually have 5 drivers in each monitor. So that's 5 little tiny speakers within each monitor, along with what are called crossover networks. So when you have 5 different speakers to produce the overall audio spectrum, there are a lot of challenges that come with that. One is you have to decide which speakers are going to play which frequencies. Then you also have to make sure that they still produce the sound within phase. And so to do that, they have to put other materials within the headphones or the in-ear monitors, so that they ensure that all of the different drivers produce sound that's phase coherent. In other words, everything's within phase. So there's quite a bit of engineering that goes into those, and it actually shows. Well, I'll talk about that in just a minute here. So that's the big question. Actually, let's go. Let me show them to you before I talk about how they sound. So we'll switch on over to our overhead camera here. So you can see in this particular case, they come in a little, well, and they come in a case, and these are specifically made for me. So we can pop that open. Now, first up, these are not the tiniest, and that's not the goal. These are made, again, for production sound mixers, so having tiny in-ear monitors was not the goal, but instead to make them so that they were very capable in terms of reference audio. And let me just show you what they look like here. Of course, they have a 3.5 millimeter termination there, but they also come with a 1/4 inch. So obviously in production sound, we're almost always using a 1/4 inch connector. But these are the custom molded monitors here. And you can see you're getting a kind of a proxy view of my ear canal. It actually goes past, there are actually 2 bends in most people's ear canals. And so it goes just to the end of the second bend, not to the, obviously to the eardrum itself, but just to the end of the second bend, and it delivers the sound directly from there. So that's what they look like. Again, not the tiniest things. In fact, if I pull out another set, let's pull out the West Tones as comparison here. Here's the West Tone as a comparison. These are also 5-driver design, but these are universal fit. Quite a bit smaller, but again, I've never been able to get the sound I was hoping for from the West Tones. All right. They, of course, come with a couple of other things. So there's a strain relief clip that they come with. You can clip to the back of your collar, so you can run the cables over your ears and then down the back of your neck. And this clips to your shirt and keeps the strain off of the cable. And it also comes with like a cleaning brush to keep them clean. And then these cables are replaceable, so they also sell the cables as replacements. They're using what look like really high quality connectors there. So the question is, how do they sound? So I did several hours of reference listening on these, so listening to different reference tracks, that is to say tracks, audio recordings that I'm very familiar with. And I can tell you, I put one of these in my right ear and then my Biodynamic DT770s on my left ear, and then switched back and forth, and they are really close. They're not perfect, but really close, surprisingly. And the bass response on them was much better than I expected, much better than I've experienced in any other sort of in-ear monitor before. I think that's 2 things. Of course, I think it's the engineering and design that went into the drivers and the voicing, but I also think it's that custom fit, which makes a huge difference. And so that's been kind of interesting. In terms of comfort, far more comfortable than any other in-ear monitor I've ever used. I haven't used them for a full production day yet, so say, for example, 10 to 12 hours. I don't know how they would hold up. I'm not used to having things in my ears for that long. I don't like having things in my ears for that long, but I would say that I'm at least hopeful that these would be more comfortable than pretty much any other in-ear monitor I've used before. So that's what we're looking at there. So in terms of the ability to reference monitor with them, I would say definitely yes. Definitely a much better experience than I've ever had before. Okay, let's head on back to the slides here. So we've kind of addressed the comfortable, much more comfortable than, again, I've ever experienced before. Getting them in is pretty straightforward as well. That's one of the things I've found with the universal fit in-ear monitors that are really hard, is that getting them in the first place is hard. These pretty much slide right in, of course, because they're custom molded to your particular ear. And yes, again, as I said, definitely reference worthy, I think, based on the familiarity that I have with my DT770s, and switching over to these, definitely would feel confident on a production day using these to monitor throughout the day. They are made out of a hypoallergenic medical grade resin, and then they actually hand polish them. And the idea with that is that they polish down any sort of rough edges, and the idea there is to eliminate what you might call hot spots, that is anywhere where it would apply pressure inside of your ear, to make them just a little bit more comfortable and make it so it's easier to wear them throughout the day. As I mentioned before too, they do have the replaceable cable, both terminated with a 3.5 millimeter plug, and then you can also adapt it to 1/4 inch if you need to do that as well. And the price. Now, here's where they are not cheap, but this is very much a niche company working on a niche product. And if you're in that game, if you are working professionally as a production sound mixer, I think there'd be a lot less hesitation for a production sound mixer that's working professionally at that price than a hobbyist that just is enthusiastic. So I definitely understand where they're coming from there. Okay, let's see if there are any questions in the chat about these. Would love to hear if you have any curiosities or anything you'd like to learn. And while we're doing that, while Danny's combing through that, I'm going to take a quick sip of water here. 1 second, be right back with you. Okay. Christopher says, agree that foam and other tip IEMs are always bad fits, but with my customs, I can wear them all day and not even feel them, and they provide nearly 30 dB of passive isolation. Yeah, that's really the idea. The healing protection is a pretty important item. It's one of the reasons so many performing musicians use them. I think, yeah, you meant hearing, of course. The hearing protection is a pretty important, yeah, and that's that makes a lot of sense because the musicians night after night performing on incredibly loud venues, they definitely need that hearing protection. So definitely some good things there. Okay, nothing else. Everyone else is just chilling out there. It looks like. Okay, fair enough.
Nothing more on that.
Nothing more on that. Okay, well let's go ahead and let's check in on our chat in general and see what other questions we've got there. Oh, and while Danny's looking that up, a couple things on my main channel, Curtis Judd on YouTube. We did release a new video this morning on the new Deity TC1 timecode generator. So if you're interested in timecode, there's some decent information there. Okay, whoops, something came and we're going to find what we need here. Okay, Mark. As far as adjusting the Mynas after you've received them, is there a policy for readjustment if they are uncomfortable? It's a good question. I would think so. I don't know. Because they did contact me and they asked specifically, hey, how are they feeling? They good fit, so on and so forth. I would have to think that if you were really struggling with the fit for some reason, that they would be able to do that. But what they do as well, and one thing I forgot to mention before, is that they're very particular about the impressions that the audiologists capture for them. And so what they do now is they actually have you take a photograph of them. So that's what I did. So I went to the audiologist. They gave me the impressions in a little box, came home, put them out, took a photo, sent them to Myna. Myna inspected them and said, okay, those look good. You can go ahead and, this is the second set. Those look good. Go ahead and send them in. And so I did that. So they're already, I think, kind of dialing in the process to make sure that is less likely to happen. I have to imagine, though, if you did find that they were a really poor fit, I would have to think that they'd be willing to kind of work with them and polish them up a little bit to get that fit right. So, Shoji, sorry, joining the live stream late. You probably covered this already, but why did you get the IEM? So Myna actually contacted me. I have not been a big fan of in-ear monitors historically. But they contacted me and said, hey, we'd love to have you try these out and share your impressions of them. And so that's exactly what I'm doing. So they have provided them to me. They've given them to me for free. And I'm just sharing my impressions at this point. So from Christopher, have you considered sending one of your A10 RXs to Sound Devices for upgrade to an A20 RX to test the new receiver? So let's talk about that just a little bit. It's a great question, Christopher. I'm going to move the Mynas out of the way here, and we're going to put a couple of things down here. So let's go ahead and head on over to the overhead camera here. So for those not familiar with Sound Devices, bought Audio Limited some years ago now, a couple of years ago, 4 years ago maybe. It's been a while. And Audio Limited makes obviously wireless microphone systems. Their A10 system was their fully digital system that they released, I believe, back in 2017, 2018, somewhere in there. In any case, great system. It's my primary wireless system. This is the A10 transmitter, the original one. And then just, it's been, a year ago now? Somewhere in that range. Sound Devices released the A20 Mini, so it's a smaller overall transmitter that's a little bit easier to hide on talent, and it has some new features as well. And in fact, one of the new they've introduced a number of really kind of interesting features on it, including a new modulation scheme that evidently can transmit quite a bit farther. Not that I ever had problems with the original scheme, but if you do need to transmit even farther, I would say though, I had a circumstance where I had a particular scene I was filming. It was a wide shot. It was one talent was resting against a vehicle from about probably 50, maybe 70 feet away from where I was with my receiver, and another car pulls into the parking lot. And I did get some dropouts when the talent was leaning back against the car with the pack on their, kind of on the belt on their rear. And it did cut out for a little bit then. That's the only time I've ever really experienced a practical dropout on these. In any case, and that was basically, I think, because the transmitter was between a piece of metal and a body. In any case, these now they have another modulation algorithm that works a little differently, that can potentially travel even farther at the same output power. So anyway, they've also just released a new receiver. And Danny, if we switch over to the Mac here, we can take a look at this. So they now have an A20. I have the A10 receivers. Each of these are dual channel receivers, and the A20 has some additional features that are new. Let me just scroll down here. I think the biggest thing that they have is this new spectra band technology. So what that allows you to do is, it basically is about the widest range a receiver can receive that I've seen on the commercial market for this type of wireless system. So it can now tune anywhere between 470 and 1525 megahertz in a single unit. So you can basically use it in pretty much any country, and you'll just have to get the transmitters that modulate for the bands that are unlicensed for the particular country where you'll be recording. So anyway, that's one of the features. Another feature is they now have what they're calling brick wall SAW filters, and so that's to eliminate out-of-band interference. And so there are various techniques you can typically use. So if you're working in a place where there is a lot of other UHF RF activity, using filters is one thing you can do. And of course, you can already do kind of just basic large wideband filters. So when you're receiving with your antenna, you can actually filter out which frequencies it's actually going to send and pass through into your receivers. So that helps a little bit, but these brick wall SAW filters evidently help even more beyond that. So you get a little bit more protection and a little bit cleaner signal that way, especially when it comes to IFB or camera hop wireless, they say. So a lot of times those are working in frequencies that are not too far away. So you can get intermodulation and things like that. So the question from Christopher was, are you going to send yours in and get them re-hardwared? They can upgrade essentially the crystal, I believe, in those and everything else that goes along with it. And it still is $1,000 operation. So I don't have the funds for that quite yet, but I am considering doing that if we do have the funds closer to the end of the year. I think you get through the end of the year to get that. They're offering that through the end of the year. You can take your A10 receivers, send them in for $1,000 for each receiver, and they will update them to the A20 hardware. So love to do that. We'll see if the funds allow. So good question, Christopher. Okay, from Daniel. Have you downloaded the newly released DaVinci Resolve 18 yet? I have. And in fact, we used it in our timecode video to demonstrate how to convert audio timecode that's recorded to an audio track within your camera into metadata or file timecode. So yes, I have the latest version. I just saw that they released 18.0.1. Haven't played with it a whole lot beyond that. So some people are complaining about issues with the waveforms not drawing correctly, which has been an issue for a long time. I would say if you're doing something really important, I would wait. That's my impression. I'd do that with the operating systems too, and generally like when a new Mac OS comes out, I like to wait until they have the .1 release, preferably, if I've got work that I have to get done. So that's my impression. But yeah, we've got it on here, and it's not our primary editing app or digital audio workstation. So in our case, that's why we download it. It's actually a new computer didn't have Resolve on it already, so that's why we downloaded it. Sonoga, it's good to hear from you today. How would you capture audio on a wedding without access from the main mixer, without using lavalier mics, and can only access the speakers? Well, then I would mic the speakers, is what I would do. So yeah, that's a totally valid way to do things. And if that's what you've got access to, that's what I would do. There are actually some advantages to that. I mean, sometimes a lot of DJs who usually are the ones that run sound for a wedding run the sound super hot, like really, really hot. And so having the ability to, set the gain appropriately, I would even maybe potentially just use a dynamic mic relatively close to the speakers. And by relatively close, I mean like within a foot or so. And then set the gain on my recorder from there. That's probably what I would do as a start. So I would love to, if anyone else there are lots of people out there that probably have more wedding experience than I do, but that's an option. And if it's windy, you're going to have to think about wind protection for your mic, for your mic as well. So something to keep in mind. All right, when you shoot with timecode, do you send audio back to the camera or just the timecode? Do you use the same wireless system so no interference will be there, or some cheap wireless? On the films that I've worked on where we've used timecode, we have just connected depends on the camera we're using. So I've worked on some where we've used Red cameras where they have a dedicated timecode input, and so they'll still capture scratch audio with that camera, and in many cases they just put like a Rode wireless, not a Rode Wireless Go, a Rode Video Mic Pro on the top of the camera. So they're still capturing scratch audio, but then we're also recording timecode to the camera. That's typically how we've approached it. I haven't done camera hops. I've never worked on pieces where they were insistent that we have them, and yeah, so I don't usually do that, but you can do that. Sorry. Oh, but that's my background on that. So, and then if you're using a camera that doesn't have a dedicated timecode input, we typically run the timecode into an audio input, and then in post convert that into metadata timecode and sync from there. So that's how I've done it. That's my experience personally. But I know there are a lot of productions where they want to run wireless to the cameras. Yeah, and it's funny to me. I mean, you can do that for sure. Yeah, if the camera's got enough inputs, you can do timecode and a wireless hop, both. Okay. And two questions here, two-part. How do I improve the audio from an indoor on corporate interview shoot? Many times I get much room audio from my MKH50, even if I'm close to the person. Usually there is not much option to move to another location, and many times I get better audio from my lav. Yeah, then go with the lav, by all means. That's if you're getting better audio from the lav, then go with the lav. And that's exactly why you do both, is so that you have that option. If there's just a lot of room noise, lav can be the best because it's so close to the sound source, and you have this natural barrier, so it essentially makes it directional. So a lot of the sound from behind is getting absorbed. Or not absorbed, or at least reflected by the body. So yeah, if the lav sounds better, don't ever hesitate. There's no shame in using a lavalier microphone. Obviously, I prefer a boom mic if I can, but if I've been in that situation as well where I had a beautiful boom setup at a Sheps CMC 641 setup, and the lav ended up sounding better, so we went with the lav. The lav, it required more work in post to get it sounding, I think, really a little bit more natural, but in the end, it produced a better result. So I think that's perfectly legitimate. You can also hang sound blankets, turn things off that can be turned off. All of those techniques still apply. So those are the things I would do to manage room noise. I've been on filming sets where we've turned off refrigerators, we've turned off air conditioners. I mean, we actually specifically worked so that we had the air conditioning running right up until we started rolling. We turned it off, did the take, turned it back on. So you can do things like that too. We turned the refrigerator off. I put my car keys in it so that we wouldn't forget to turn it back on, which Danny gives a thumbs up on. Otherwise, people will have a refrigerator full of bad food potentially. So those are all techniques that you should employ, and you can turn off HVAC systems for just the take. So don't be afraid to explore those. I know in corporate settings it's a lot harder to do that. In fact, where I used to work, when we would do the filming sessions, they had white noise generators in the ceilings, and we would actually ask them to turn those off during the filming sessions, and they were willing to do it. So definitely don't be afraid to ask these things. It's a partnership, and definitely try your best there. You might be surprised. Whenever they see a film crew show up, they're like, oh, neat, they're filming here. And so a lot of times they want to be part of that, and just say, hey, be kind about it. Don't say, turn your thing off. You don't need to say that, but just partner with them, and I think they'll understand. And you can explain, hey, we're getting there's a lot of sound in the room right now that we're trying to reduce. So is there any way we could turn off this or that, or whatever the case may be? All right. Speaking of RX and TX units, wireless receivers and transmitters, if upgrading from Sennheiser Lav systems, would you recommend sound devices, Zaxcom, or Electrosonics, or is this personal preference? Most of my experiences with sound devices and audio limited. I have used the Sennheisers in the past. I have used some Electrosonics gear. And I think it really comes down to they're moving forward a lot right now. I mean, another thing to consider too is Shure's Axient digital system. From my point of view, that's like if I was buying today, I would probably buy Axient. It's a really great system. And it's a much richer system. It's been around a little bit longer, and it's Shure is one of the forefront in wireless audio. And that system is really mature. It's just the bag receiver that's actually relatively new. So that system is really mature and has some great features. Although Sound Devices now is coming up with a lot of great features. So I haven't felt a need to move from the Sound Devices, audio limited, just because it's serving my purposes really well. But that's the same thing with Zaxcom, the same thing with Electrosonics, is they can serve the purposes really well. I think if you want sort of that integrated experience, you're more likely to find that with Zaxcom, with Sound Devices, and with Shure. Shure probably has the richest system, I would say. Super expensive, but they have things like Wireless Workbench to help do all the frequency coordination. That's another thing that the new Sound Devices A20 has, is it evidently does frequency coordination in a slightly more automated fashion than it has in the past, but the Shure Wireless Workbench is just really, really mature and makes setting up a lot of channels really quick. So depends. If you're going to run a lot of channels of audio, that's where I would probably look at Shure or Zaxcom or Sound Devices. And I think Electro has an app too that does frequency coordination. They all do. So I don't know. It's not an easy answer. They all produce, and there's Wizicom as well, by the way. So there's another one just to throw into the mix. But I think there's going to be some personal preference there. I think if you're going to look at analog systems, then the Electrosonics are just really rock solid. Like they've got so many years of iteration on them. They're just really, really good. Zaxcom, I've heard mixed things. I've never used them firsthand. A lot of people that use Zaxcom love Zaxcom and all of the integration that they've done. So they're mixers. You can control everything from the mixer itself. So if you are working with a Zaxcom mixer recorder, then that probably makes sense to look at the Zaxcom wireless. Yeah, so that's what I mean by integrated. So I guess there's some thoughts. I've rambled for a little bit there, but thanks for the question. It's a good one. Rodecaster Pro version 1 is selling for around $300 used. If price isn't an issue, does one need to go straight for the 2 for the added benefits? No, definitely not. No, I think a used version of 1 is great. I think a lot of people are up in arms about the latency on the headphone output and the monitor outputs. I actually bought something so that I can measure it. I have a friend, Alan Tepper. He he's a regular contributor over at Pro Video Coalition. He focuses mainly on sound, but he did a measurement with his, and he measured 8 milliseconds of latency from relative to, yeah, so he essentially used his microphone splitter and was able to measure it. So I recently bought this, which is a little box here that is a mic splitter made by Radial Engineering. So this can actually, you feed one microphone in, it goes through a transformer, and then it splits it out into two. So what I'll be able to do with that is feed one microphone into the Rodecaster Pro 2, and then out from there on the either the headphones or the line outputs into a recorder, say for example my Mix Pre 3, and then also feed directly from the mic out of the output, the splitter box, directly to the Mix Pre, record both of those channels, and then see how offset they are to measure that latency. But 8 milliseconds, from my point of view, is actually totally usable. We did a live stream 3 or 4 weeks ago now where we streamed with the Rodecaster Pro 2 and the YOLO Box Pro, and I was experiencing a bunch of latency. It turns out that the latency is primarily on the YOLO Box, not on the Rodecaster. So we were experiencing about 100 milliseconds, and it turns out that it was the YOLO Box that was applying that latency for some reason. So I would say that the Rodecaster Pro, the original version, is, unless there's something specific on the two that you specifically want and need, then I think the one is still a great piece of kit. So, also, if there's time, is there a channel checking system you would recommend? Sennheiser totally removed their website thing, and I'm still looking. Oh, you mean for checking wireless frequencies? You know, several people have tried that over the years. I know that Matt... Oh, what's Matt? Sound Rolling. Matt Price, I think is his name. He had an app for a while that would do that. I don't know if his app is back. You know, I usually just do it in the local area, so I'm pretty familiar with what's going on here. Well, I guess a question. Are you trying to figure out what's legal to use, what the unlicensed bands are? Or are you trying to get information on which bands tend to be most available in a particular locality? If you're looking for the latter, what tends to be easiest to work with in a particular locality, that's where Matt Price's app will be. And let me see if we've still got that. And others, if you know of an app that does this, please let us know in the chat. We'd love to hear about that. I'm going to look under my apps, under audio. Just checking to see if I've got it here. Freak Finder is a useful one. That's a different type of thing. What Freak Finder does, FREQ Finder, what that allows you to do is it helps you do your own frequency coordination. We talked about this some time ago. We did a live stream with Michael Wynn, and he talked about using that. I would recommend you go back and take a look at that. So that can be a useful tool as well. Shure has a free frequency finder on their website that, while recommending Shure products, can be used for all vendors. Sorry, I don't have the direct link. So that's super helpful. Thank you for that, Christopher. We were near military bases, and all the frequency for most of the lavs I had did not work. That's why I'm asking. Yeah, military bases are tough. There's a lot of wireless going on there usually, especially if it's got an airfield. So that can be tricky. Crazy idea, but you might want to even look at 2.4 gigahertz in that case. Borrow them or something if you can, so you don't have to make that investment. But maybe bouncing down to the consumer wireless would work better. I don't know. There's a lot going on there. So, okay. How to match two different microphones like a lav and a boom. I'm using the IQ and Isotope or Adobe Audition, but it's a hit and miss, and I never get them close. Is there any workflow? Well, in RX, if you have the advanced version, there is. Let me just give me a second to pull this up. Okay, Danny, if you wouldn't mind switching over. There is the EQ match module. I believe that certainly in the advanced version. I think it might be in the standard version as well. It's not in the Elements version. But this allows you to, essentially what you can do is go to the microphone that you're trying to match to, highlight a section and click Learn, then go back to the microphone that you're trying to match, and you can render that out. And that, I found that helps. It's not perfect. It will never be 100% perfect, but it will be pretty good. This module does a pretty good job. Now, if you want something more sophisticated in the advanced version, there's ambient match that'll also help to match the ambience, which is an important element of overall getting microphones to match. So there's that. And then there's the really advanced one that runs in Pro Tools. That also does a couple of things. So it does this EQ match, plus it does the ambience match. So it kind of combines them into one plugin, and that's worth checking out as well if you're doing a lot of post-production and you need to match those. So hopefully that helps. No more questions? We have 10 minutes. All right. Well, I'm excited to try the mic splitter. So they're using this. This is Radial Engineering makes some pretty good little boxes like this. And actually, Danny uses a Radial Engineering preamplifier for her fiddle when she's doing her looping. In any case, this has a Jensen transformer in it. So really high quality. And what you do is you plug the microphone in here, and then you have a through port. So this will go to whatever your primary thing is, and that's, a mixer, recorder, whatever. And this is how you supply phantom power if the microphone needs it. So it can feed that back in here, and then you can split out. And actually, you can go 3 ways, to be honest. So you have the 2 isolated outputs over here as well. So kind of an interesting little design. It does have a 30 dB pad, so if you're bringing a line level signal in, you can get that in. And then it does have a ground lift on each of the isolated outputs as well. Totally passive, no power needed, just because the transformer is evidently quite efficient. So looking forward to trying that out and that measuring the latency on my copy of the Rodecaster Pro 2. And if mine comes out at 8 milliseconds as well, see, most people, so here's the problem. So if you put headphones on and you're talking into a microphone and listening to yourself back, most people can detect a difference when it gets to somewhere in the range of 10 to 15 milliseconds. 8 milliseconds is starting to bump up against that. So some people will notice that. For me, I notice it, but it's not, I have always just set up to this point, it's not necessarily like a deal breaker to me. But for some people, it's just really annoying. And so that is something to know about the Rodecaster Pro 2. There's a little bit more latency on the outputs than on the original version. I think it's just able to do more processing. And so there's a little bit more latency. A couple more questions. Let me just finish this thought here. But so that's just something to keep in mind. If that's something that you are very sensitive to, then there's some people are just saying, I'm not going to ever use the Rodecaster Pro 2. And it's like, okay, well, I don't think that makes it a device that is not usable for anybody, but if you are especially sensitive to 8 milliseconds of latency, then consider other options. Okay, here we go. Jonathan, I'm recording interview with kids at school. I'm supposed to represent the school environment. Unfortunately, the time allocated for the shoot is super loud. What setup could help to get better audio? Well, I would, location is going to be really important. So finding a location. Another thing too is that I don't know, what I would probably do. I would build a little booth out of sound blankets. So I'd bring a couple C stands or 3 C stands and essentially make a little wall, a little cubicle around the filming set. And that'll take care of a lot of it. And then you could just boom a microphone from there. So that would probably be the first thing I would do. I would also have as a backup a lavalier microphone. You're probably if you're dealing with kids here, you're probably going to have them have to clip it on, or maybe have their teacher clip on the mic, and I wouldn't bother trying to hide it. So I would have that as a backup as well. That's my thinking, just knowing what I know from what you've told me here. So that's how I'd approach it. Also, the benefit of putting those sound blankets around is you're not going to have a bunch of other people interrupting the filming session, and that can be really important. So especially when you're talking about kids, they can get really distracted. And so, especially if they've got their peers out there making a bunch of noise and, googly eyes at them or whatever, just to kind of give it a little bit more privacy, that's what I would do as well. All right, from Mark, question about normalization when there are several spikes in the audio. Would you replace spikes in audio before running a normalized pass? Yes, or even a compression pass. So if there's, a lot of times people, the very first word in a sentence or the first maybe phrase in a sentence can be really, really loud. What I do sometimes is I actually literally highlight that and pull it down by 3 dB or so, just to give yourself a little bit more headroom before you apply the compression, and it will typically sound a little bit better that way. If you just hard compress that stuff, it'll change the timbre quite a bit, and it won't sound as great generally in my experience. So that's what I would typically do. Yeah, definitely reduce the spike, and especially if it's just a single transient, just pull those down. That's not going to hurt anything usually. Hope this makes sense, but it seems to throw off any attempts to normalize when I have like a brief spike in the audio using Fairlight. Yep, absolutely. Totally makes sense. Been there 1,000 times, and absolutely yes. Use your ears to review it to make sure that whatever you're doing doesn't change things. But if you're talking about a transient, like a single part of the waveform that goes up and comes right back down, usually those are just annoying noises anyway, things that you don't want to keep in many cases. Those I don't hesitate to pull down at all, and then do your compression and normalization for sure. All right, Jonathan, appreciate it. Never really thought about using blankets. Yes, absolutely. Sound blankets are, I think, one of a location sound recordist's best tools. In fact, I would rather use a less expensive microphone and several sound blankets than a really expensive microphone and no sound blankets. In the end, you'll get better results generally. So absolutely. Hi, Camille. How can I monitor myself and hear my guests during Teams Zoom sessions with one headset? Well, you have to be able to do some routing. So what happens is Zoom never plays your own audio back. That's by design because a lot of people are using Zoom with no headphones. So they're trying their best to try and manage all of that. But what you can do is if your audio interface doesn't support any sort of routing itself, what you can do is there is an app called Ginger Audio Caster, and it allows you to do, it's basically like on the Mac, it's like audio hijack, so you can reroute the audio, and so you can route your own audio back into your headset as well. So that's probably the first thing I would look at. We're going to take a look at that hopefully in the next few weeks here. We'll have a video on that, but that's one thing you can do. 2 more questions. They're coming in now. Shoji, will the custom IEMs become part of your permanent workflow? If so, why? Well, they certainly will be when I do multi-person live streams because A, they're way more comfortable. B, they're not these massive headphones that you have to wear. So visually, they're a little bit less imposing. But also for production sound, I don't know yet. That's a to be determined. But I think there's some, like we mentioned before in the pros and cons section, if you missed that, definitely go back and take a look at that. But there's some definite advantages to using in-ears versus over-ears or circumoral headphones in some circumstances. So I will say that even regular circumoral headphones, after 4, 5, 6 hours of wearing those, it just feels like your head has been in a vice grip. It's really fatiguing. So if these in-ears are more comfortable, there's definitely a case for that. Kevin, any new courses in the works? Actually, I'm glad you brought that up, Kevin. Thank you. It's good to see you too, by the way. We actually are in the process of updating some courses, which is very important. We did add some new segments to the Sound Devices Mix Pre course. The Mix Pre has received a bunch of firmware updates, and so some of the menus had changed, and so we went back and redid the one on using the Mix Pre as an audio interface. That has been uploaded just recently within the last week or so. And then we'll also be going back to revisit the Zoom F8 and F8N course to update it to also cover the F8N Pro. Very, very few differences between the F8N and the F8N Pro, but they're just a couple, obviously the 32-bit float recording, we'll want to cover that. So that'll be updated here in the next little bit. And then I think the next thing on the horizon from there is probably an Adobe Audition mixing course after that. So again, it's really just a matter of time and finding the time. now that Emma is getting up to speed as our producer, and we're getting back to a weekly cadence on producing videos on the YouTube channel. Our next goal is to get to a point where she's able to help me produce fast enough that we even have a portion of the week to work on courses as well. So we'll keep on ramping Emma and her skill set, and we'll get there hopefully pretty soon. So thanks, Kevin. Okay, I think that's everything we have for today, and we're at time. Thank you everybody so much for joining us today. I hope you're able to get out there and make some great sound this week, and we will talk to you again soon. Take care.